Hello, everyone. We're going to go ahead and get started. I feel like I don't know a lot of you. Who's here for the first-ish time?
And I don't think it...
Cool. Yeah, it feels like every meetup we have, like half the people are new. So that's always fun.
Wait,
Pardon?
I thought you said used.
No, not used.
Oh.
New or used cars. Thank you, everyone, for coming. Thanks to Groupon for offering the space and paying for the food. Also for employing me and Sean and Ashish and Levi. We all work here. Sean and I are on the same team, user interface engineering team. We do quite a bit of Ember work. That work is growing. You may be surprised to hear that as a technology company, we are in fact hiring in this era where I think pretty much no one's hiring. So if you'd like to do cool UI stuff, please come chat with us. We'd be happy to talk about our experiences here. So this meetup's is going to be, I guess, a little non-conventional because we're going to do a recap of EmberConf, and the way it will work is we have some slides about sort of each of the talks. Who went to EmberConf? Who's here? I hope it's not just... Okay, cool. And the way it will work is as we mention a talk, if you were there and you would like to say like why you really liked or perhaps didn't really like this talk, feel free to come up and chat. If no one has any comments about a talk, we'll just move on to the next one. So this could either be the longest or shortest meetup we've ever had, which is pretty funny. Does anyone? Are there any questions or announcements people would like to make? Do you want to talk about training, or is it's full up anyway? So
Well, it's full, and yeah, on Saturday there's Ember training, but if you guys have done any work with Ember before, you're probably fine.
So and who's that through?
Oh, that one's through Innova.
Cool.
So.
Very cool. Will Nova be doing training in the future? Should we?
I suppose that'd be up to me, so possibly.
Okay, cool. Well, I hope the training goes well.
Yeah, I mean, if I do a follow-up, it might be the same thing, but introducing Ember data.
Yeah.
Because we're just doing fixtures to it. So.
Very cool. Very cool. Other announcements or questions? No? No? Cool. Sorry. Just used to my keyboard shortcuts. Sorry, just the mouse. What century is this, Sean? Linux people.
Using my Linux video.
On a Mac.
I know.
I don't know. Sean and I we don't get into these fights. It's okay. How do you tell it to say this is okay?
It'll go away.
We're just going to wait quietly, contemplating our life. Okay, there we go. EmberConf 2015 recap. So the EmberConf was fun. So actually before this happened, Leah Silber, who organizes EmberConf, does actually an amazing job. Props to her. I think there's even a slide where we talk about that possibly later. Before this, she organized a mentoring event. So it was for people who are either sort of well-versed in Ember community or have been to a lot of conferences, and to connect with people who are either new to Ember or who have never been to a conference before, so that you're not that sad, lonely person sitting there and like no one talks to you because there's all these existing social situations. So I got to be a mentor for that. I think you were also a mentor for that, and Ashish was a mentor for that. So it was fun. We just got together and basically did speed dating, which is fun. We had like quote unquote 3 minutes, but I think to keep us on schedule, that time kept shrinking over time, and just got to chat with people. And it was fun. There's people like of all skill levels, people who had done Ember before, not done Ember before, conferences before, not conferences before, folks from all around the States, multiple foreign countries.
People were also loosely paired based on interest.
Yes.
Which was nice. So, and you were introduced ahead of time.
Mm-hmm.
So my mentee was actually a nice pair because we just talked a lot before the conference. Like meeting at the conference was just a formality for us. And I still talk to my mentee now, which is pretty cool.
My mentee and I got joined because we both do CrossFit. So yeah, yes, we even lift. And but he was fine. So like once he got to the conference and met some people, he was off doing his own thing. Who is your mentee?
Steve Phillips. He was fine as well.
Yeah.
I think like I was the one who was like a mentor who doesn't do Ember. So I guess like my mentee was like, yeah.
Yeah, but
more mentor than you.
you go to a lot of conferences and you know a lot of people in the Ember community, which is a little weird for someone who doesn't do Ember. So that was, go ahead. So that was kind of before, probably the like showstopper of the conference was the keynote announcements. Version guides, which Sean kindly put in here, is actually a project I've been working on. Sonora guides are now versioned, although the only version up there is 1.10 so far. I'll be publishing the 1.11 guides shortly. So the 1.10 guides are basically like the guide version that existed as we've been mutating it over time. 1.11, we've migrated all the examples to use Ember CLI style, so all the globals are just gone. And we've officially, if you go to just the Ember site, you'll see that the way we recommend installing is now just using npm and the installer. Many people have not liked that. We did not realize the large community of people who don't use the command line and who really like getting packages by just downloading them as a zip file. We didn't realize there were so many sort of like jQuery style developers who were using Ember. So part of the 1.11 or 1.12 docs will probably be addressing that situation. Return to full screen. The second cool thing, yes.
I have a question about that.
Yeah.
Like with the JS bins, is there like a plan? I know I saw some GitHub thing.
Yeah.
But it's so disjointed now from the CLI.
Yes. So the question was, with our JS bins. So we've used JSBin as examples of how to use the thing. JSBin is kind of heading towards an apocalypse of accepting jQuery. All the major web frameworks essentially are going to require a build tool because they're all moving to ES6 style classes and ES6 style module systems. So the world where you can just be like type a giant JavaScript file and expect stuff to happen, like that's just like a year from now that will be gone. And JSBin and JSFiddle just don't have any notion of like different files, import syntax, any of that. So unfortunately, we're just getting rid of all the JSBin examples. They're commented out, so we can like recreate them if we need to, but we just don't know what the solution for that is, unfortunately. It's kind of a bummer because I think that was one of the more popular features. Just to see it run, and you can go and play with it. Yeah, I don't know what our
I was just going to ask, does that mean that global style, non-Ember CLI style is going to be like not the default, but it's going to be out entirely?
Yes, there will be no way to do global style for 2.0. Yeah. There's a couple blog posts about it. That wasn't part of this announcement because I think we've been talking about that for quite a while. But yeah, the 2.0 style 2.0 will just require a build system, and you will be expected to not use globals. So that will just be totally, the global resolver will be gone. You could add it back in. I don't know, for people who know how lookup happens, there's actually a piece of code called the resolver that just like when you say like, oh, I need a view called this, it goes to the resolver and says like, where do I look for that? If you're using an Ember CLI app, that actually turns into AMD modules, and it knows to require a particular AMD module. If you're using the globals build, it knows to look for a particular constant on your app namespace.
I'm mostly curious about that and JSBin because, I mean, I'm using Ember CLI for my actual apps.
Yeah.
But JSBin was invaluable for debugging.
Yeah.
That's what I'm really...
It's super useful. We're going to have to, as a community of not just Ember developers, but of JavaScript developers, figure out what to do. React has a build tools requirement for 1.0. They're saying Angular is actually going to be, I don't think that was actually announced. Oh, funny story. At the EmberConf, which is Angular's conference, happened the day after the end of Ember conference. And a surprise to many people, including some of the Ember core team, was they're like partnering with us. And they're actually we're going to be generalizing Ember CLI to just be a general build pipeline for JavaScript applications. So Angular will be using that. So yeah, if you live in the world of like downloading a file and then typing a bunch of sort of globally exposed JavaScript, like that era is just going away. And I don't. If you look at the discussed at Ember.com, there's a lot of posts about like people who are basically feeling like they're left behind because they don't use CLIs, they don't use Node, they're used like. The refrain that keeps coming up and has for many years is like the browser doesn't have a build step, right? Like the browser's build step is reload. Just reload the page and you get the new version of the code. That is unfortunately going away. Part of that is because JavaScript, the language, is obviously maturing with future ECMAScript specifications being backported to the language. It seems like the best in breed technologies at this point are pre-adopting that through a transpile process. So Ember 2.0 will likely have ES6 classes, so we won't have our own object system anymore. It'll all just be based on the standard. And we run through a transpiler that we thankfully don't have to maintain to turn it into ES5 standard that'll run in the browser. But yeah, the JSBin stuff is kind of a bummer. I don't know how to solve it. There is a post on one of the issues someone built, basically a thing where you can make an Ember CLI project and push your app code to a gist. and then he made a thing that will view. It'll use the GitHub API to pull that code and actually render it in the page. There's just questions about like how do we integrate that into the guides? How do we do versioning stuff? So at some point we'll have live examples. It just won't quite be as simple as it is right now, unfortunately. Fastboot was the next technology. So Fastboot, for people who don't know, is kind of the continuation of our server rendering process. So probably the best way to explain this is to think about what Ember will be like a year from now. Ember will fit into a very different slot that it does now. We won't just be a client-side application framework. You'll be able to do server-side rendering. So you can think of this as a drop-in replacement for something like Express, except it will also do client-side. The difference between this and something like Meteor, where Meteor is actually like a strict divide of client and server environments, we'll just do the initial rendering on the server and then send down the HTML along with additional annotation around the HTML that will then tick up, and now the JavaScript takes over. So if you imagine like you visit a URL, we'll send down a fully rendered web page that rendered just as if Ember had rendered it on the client. It'll just have rendered it on the server. And then the JavaScript will pick up after that. And then if you click a link and you're doing a route navigation, you would only redraw the part of the screen that was sort of the pivot route. So like your application layout would stay there, and any parent routes that you were remaining in would stay, and just the child routes would swap out. And if someone happened to be really quick and clicked before the JavaScript booted, that would just make another HTTP request for a full page load. So it's just like browsing a totally server rendered application. It will just turn into a client rendered application when the JavaScript finally boots up. Yes?
I was at the conference, but didn't think of this question then. So does that mean that like now, like to take advantage of Fastboot, you essentially you either have to have a JavaScript runtime in your server side, or you expect your JavaScript server side to be replaced Node?
You will have to have a JavaScript environment. Yeah, it has to be a Node basically, or IO, I suppose, but a Node-like environment. Yeah. So if you're
a way to like Rails backend and this too.
So this will work if you are. I'm trying to give a talk about this at Cascadia.js of like sort of what website and web application development will look like for some people in the near future. So I can talk a little bit about what Groupon does, although we don't happen to use Ember for this right now. We had a single Rails application that was like all of Groupon.com. So if you went to Groupon.com, you were basically hitting one giant Rails application. And we've talked about this a lot, and we frequently talk about how that doesn't scale. Like, Rails doesn't scale. But it doesn't not scale in the sense of like CPU cycles or memory usage, although those are a little slower than other environments. It didn't scale in the sense that like as we were growing in engineering org, it became increasingly difficult to put 100 to 200, 300 engineers on one project. And we needed a way of breaking up our Rails application into many smaller applications, which isn't really Rails's strength, right? Like the Rails strength is like you have a mostly server rendered application talking to a single data store. I think if that's what you're building, you'd be like crazy not to use Rails at this point. But what we were building was actually a series of many smaller applications. And all of those applications got their data from services. So they're not making database requests, they're making AJAX requests. So if you imagine Groupon.com, you go to like Groupon.com/goods. That'll make a request to our routing layer, which will figure out like what application am I booting right now. That'll load up our goods interaction layer. And that application running in Node is making HTTP requests for its data. And then those HTTP requests come back, and we render that with a template and then send that to the browser. And in that world where you have services as your data source, and then you're making HTTP and combining that data with templates, like making HTTP requests and combining with templates basically describes how client rendering works. And so you can run that process in any JavaScript environment, basically. So you can run it in the browser, you can run it on a JavaScript environment on a mobile device, you can run it on the server.
So there is client server specific to like the batch service.
Yeah, so services, I think services are pretty easy for people to understand, right? Like services are, you make HTTP requests, you get some data. The tricky part that's hard to get your mind around is this stop thinking in terms of server and client. Literally, there is an application and it can run in a JavaScript environment. Right? That may occur in a data center that Groupon owns. That may occur on your laptop. It may occur on a mobile device. That same code blob that makes requests and takes that data and combines it with a template runs in every JavaScript environment. So
a virtual the app is running both on client browsers and user browsers, but it has the capacity to run in the server
Yep.
to generate the HTML.
Yes, and that allows you to create a fast boot. So the benefit is right now there's server-side rendering is in beta, I think, and that's it won't like magically turn into a JavaScript application, but it's good for SEO. So you can basically say like, oh, if the Google bot is visiting me right now, use Ember through Node on the server and render the exact page that I would render in the browser. If you attempt to do things that require JavaScript, just nothing happens, basically. The next step of that is to actually make stuff happen. So for SEO, you would send this thing down, and SEO just doesn't execute JavaScript, so it doesn't matter. For user browsing, you would send this down. If they happen to browse really quickly, it just wipes that context away, makes another HTTP request for the whole page, gives you the whole page back. So if a person's browsing really fast, it'll look like it's just server rendered entirely. Once the JavaScript ticks over and executes, then rendering happens on the client, basically. So that makes sense. It's a little weird. It's actually really hard to explain. We've been in conversations with people in the Groupon organization talking about, like, is this a viable strategy for us to use in the future? And, like, getting someone set. So it's hard enough if, like, you work in the browser to make someone understand this. Now imagine, like, they don't work in the browser. They actually don't trust the browser. They think the browser is a really awful environment and don't like that we have to use it at all. And then try to sell them on, like, and then we'll run entire applications in the browser. It is a hard sell. But so that is fast boot. And then new members. We added 3 new members to Ember Core. Edward Faulkner, for people who don't know him, he's like E4F on GitHub and Twitter. He's responsible for Liquid Fire, the very popular animation library for Ember. Martin Munoz and Matthew Beal both worked on the HTML bars project. And then Glimmer. Glimmer is the goofy code name that we came up with because we realized if you have a goofy code name, people like it. And that is the new rendering engine that borrows heavily from React style. So basically at the view rendering layer, we'll no longer be doing two-way bindings. It'll be one-way data binding. So data comes in and just flows down, and that's it. And there are slides for that, sorry. So we're in the process of getting that working. Oh, wow, we're really close. So essentially, Tom and Yehuda, so this is being sponsored by Bustle, and then I think other companies I'm not supposed to mention. Other large technology companies that may do things like manage your virtual resume or give you movies over the internet are sponsoring this work. And Tom and Yehuda and Matt and Martin are basically driving a lot of this forward. So it's basically an entire rewrite of the view layer engine. So it's being entirely rewritten. We did this because our performance is... Wait, my thing is gone. You took my link away. My other link is gone. Oh, there it is. Yes. Yes. So Ember is not yet fast. We're still 426 tests to say that we've reached parity with the old rendering engine. It will probably ship in 1.12 beta, maybe 1.13 beta. It'll definitely be heavily part of 2.0. This all came about because at ReactConf, a person did a presentation showing the performance characteristics of an actual application, Ember versus Angular versus React, and React performed very, very well with this virtual DOM technology we talk about all the time. Angular performed decently, and then Ember was very, very slow. I will actually... Oh, do we have audio or no? Probably not.
Just turn up the audio.
Does it go up to 11?
It might.
Let's find out. What? No noise at all. What did you do? What did I...
We will confirm Ryan Florence's original
hypothesis
that Ember is very slow.
Okay, so it looks like
In this
we
case,
are...
We should actually mention, this is basically the exact crafted stress test to make Ember very slow, right? So this is the case, because Ember will have to re-render all the time, this is extremely painful for Ember. This is a stress test that really underscores our pathology.
So we have applied the scientific method, and yes, we have reproduced the results. Now here is React. Pretty embarrassing for Ember in comparison. And now here is the new rendering engine in Ember. And just in case you think this is a screencast of React we recorded and changed the address bar, it's online. It's dbmonster.firebaseapp.com. You can load it up on your computer right now, and you can check it out. And you can verify that you can indeed reproduce the results as well.
So that's the new rendering engine. It's a pretty monumental effort. It's funny, we at the last EmberConf, so that was like May of last year, we met with a bunch of the React people and people who really liked using React and tried to tease out of them, like, what about using React do you find so enjoyable? And no one could really explain it to us, so we just had to like go learn React and figure out like, oh, like the programming model of data flows down and events flow up. And that will trigger, at some point in that chain, data changes, which then flow down, and that's just you re-render any place the data changes. Was just like, oh, yes, this is a simpler programming model. And then all the cool stuff that comes out of it, of like knowing exactly what you need to re-render and not having to do a lot of tracking around that, allowed us to rewrite. I think Yehuda had some slides around sort of the process behind it, which is rather interesting. So React, who's familiar with the React's virtual DOM terminology? A little bit. For those who aren't, I'll explain it really briefly. So basically, for rendering in the browser, like far and away, the DOM, the document object model interface, is like the worst performing part of the browser. It's incredibly slow. So you want to avoid touching it at all costs. But as you're mutating data, you have to figure like, well, some of this was represented in display on it using the DOM, and I want it to re-render. And so to figure out what parts need to re-render, they're actually maintaining an entirely separate entirely separate object structure that mirrors the DOM and making mutations to that. And they can actually just run a diffing algorithm. Like, here's one giant object that's a tree. It represents the DOM. And here's an object that represents some data changes after that happens. Like, run a diffing algorithm, and now you have a small subset of like, oh, here's what's been added, here's what's been removed. And now you can figure out what actual parts of the DOM you need to touch. So Ember goes kind of one better because we have handlebars templates. So for example, in this div class item, and then we have the if block, and then we have a paragraph with some curlies, and then a p class with a popover. Oh, yes, I can full screen that. I hope I can full screen and it won't play. Good. So because we have a declarative template language, as we parse this HTML into a handlebars template, we actually know, like, div class item, that will never change. We don't have to create an object structure to represent that. That is basically static and final in the nerdy Java sense. If enabled, we can annotate like, oh, this may change. The P will never change, although its contents might change. P class popover will never change, although its contents might change. So in the sort of like early tests around it with dbmonster, we were actually like 15 to 20% faster than React's rendering because we're using the same sort of virtual DOM strategy. But we only need to even track a subset of the virtual DOM. The rest of it we just know is static and don't have to track. I don't know if that will pan out like when it's all finally migrated. We may be roughly similar to React. I think the takeaway is performance when this lands is no longer an argument against Ember, basically. Questions here? Oh yeah, this is the slide. And if you really want to see it, you can crack it open in your laptop and run it. Doing stuff. Runs a little slower through a VM. So this was an actual Ryan Florence did this because this is an actual app he had to write, and this basically monitors. I guess you can't see. It's actually doing re-renders of. There's like several hundred. You can think of this as like your activity monitor in a Mac, or whatever the equivalent of Windows is. Is there an activity monitor on Windows?
Yeah.
Task manager. Basically that, so as performance usage goes up and down, it's resorting this table and re-rendering with several hundred, and it's just doing this much faster. I mean, this is obviously horrible UX. You would never want like, oh, cluster slave 7, and then it jumps away. But this is sort of maximum performance that you're probably going to want out of an application. And you can play with this right now. There's a fork of Ember CLI and of Ember. I think it's either Glimmer or Fastboot, one of the two, for the two projects. You can check it out and play with it. Cool. I'm trying to full screen. Oh man, I just talked about all this stuff. So all that stuff. I guess this was mentioned. You can use curlies anywhere now. because HTML bars is actually building up an object structure and knows about where you are. It knows like, oh, you're using curlies within a property definitions value, and it knows like, don't put script tags there, just put an actual value in. And then in the future, we'll be able to have this angle bracket style. So components will now look just like the W3C component spec, basically. So you'll be able to do these. Other cool stuff is, I mean, I guess theoretically you'll be able to run these anywhere. They won't have to exist inside an Ember application. If you have the HTML bars runtime, you could put these in an Angular or React app. We have a really easy interrupt story with React. So if you have a React component that someone else uses, we would pass data to that React component, and then React is responsible for tracking that data, and we would stop tracking it. So if you have a cool React component that you'd like to use in an Ember app, that'll be totally possible. Probably the biggest announcement that people got really excited about was we're bringing a lot of the disparate projects sort of in under one house. They're not all sort of core official projects, but they'll be updated in lockstep and get a lot of our support process. So on June 12th, we'll release the Ember 2.0 beta, so the first beta in our 6-week cycle. So we'll have 6 smaller betas after that. Ember CLI will have 1.0 beta. Ember Data will have a 1.0 beta. List View, which some people use, it's sort of performant rendering of large collections of data, will be in core, or maintained by members on core, 1.0 beta, and then Liquid Fire, the animation library, will be maintained by members of core and be 1.0 beta 5 at June 12th. And then they'll all be on the same 6-week release cycle that we have for core, which is nice because right now it's a little painful. Like Ember itself is incredibly stable, but if you're using different parts of the ecosystem, it can be painful because they're not at 1.0 yet, and so they're rapidly changing and there are deprecations all the time. So that was the keynote. The next talk was Chan Can Code. Does anyone want to talk about this besides me? I can also just chat because I thought it was a good presentation. Yeah, so all the EmberConf videos are already up on YouTube, which I was like actually surprised anyone decided to come to this because you all can just watch the video. So I'll be perfectly honest. I've never used Ember Data successfully. I'm very hesitant about the project, and he gave the like most cogent description of how Ember Data should work and how it will work at Ember or at basically 1.0. The way Ember Data used to work was there was an adapter layer where you would make AJAX requests. And then those would come back and you would attempt to tell your model, like, here's some data, here's how you should behave. And it turns out, like, because there's no real specification around data communication over HTTP in terms of the data structure or querying, it's just, like, impossible. Because, like, so here's a good analogy. Imagine there was no SQL. And every project wrote their own database and designed their own query language for getting data out and putting data in. Now imagine trying to write something like Active Record, where it's just like you have to support every crazy permutation of how to insert and get data back out. It's just insane to do. So the new Ember Data will basically require you to use JSON API as a spec. So JSON API is like a community-focused version of how you should be communicating with JSON APIs. And your adapter layer actually will just translate JSON into that format. And then the modeling layer just expects that format entirely. So it's much more like Active Model, where it's just like it's expecting an object structure in a particular shape, and you are adapting the object structure before you have models, and then your models will just work. He did a demo where, to show how flexible this is, he made just like AJAX requests to Hacker News, like they don't have an API, just the website, and got like DOM fragments from the results. So you like make a request for a page and then would use jQuery to like pull out document fragments of that and convert them to JSON API style JSON and then pass that onto the modeling layer. And then his whole app just worked as if Hacker News had an API. And then he released it as a Chrome extension. So you can install this Chrome extension, which I think is like super, super cool. Install this Chrome extension. When you visit Hacker News, it'll detect that you're there, and it will run this Ember app instead of the default Hacker News. And it's basically just an adapter layer over like HTML. And I was just like, oh my God, that's so clever. So you could actually, I think the approach is super cool. If you ever have a site that you really like, but you feel has a horrendous UI, it's really, really easy to just be like, oh, I'll just screw your UI, I'll just make my own. And if they have an API, you could obviously do that with Ember pretty easily. And if they don't, you can just use a Chrome extension and stick that on top. Which is one of my favorite talks. He was also really, really funny. He works on the Rails core team. He's kind of like my counterpart. So he's responsible for a lot of public API design and documentation and guides. And he works closely with Aaron Patterson, Tender Love. And so this was a very Tender Love style presentation with a lot of very clever humor. Someone went and was like, oh, it was really cool. It was like a Tender Love style. And I was standing next to him. He's like, more like a Tender Love ripoff, let's be honest. But a really cool presentation. Actually, we could probably, I don't know, is Sean here? We can just install this on Sean's computer. What's he going to do?
He also changed his name to Adapter Patterson for a while.
So you're saying that it was all happening in the adapter, though?
Yes.
Not the serializer?
Not the serializer.
Because we do a kind of something a little similar to like that in the serializer.
Yeah. Nope. So now it should be basically like once you hit the modeling layer, which is like serializing, deserializing, you really should just convert your data to JSON API spec. So basically, the adapter is just making XHRs, getting the JSON, which will probably be in like whatever crazy format the services you're talking to decide it, and then mutate it there. And obviously, mutating JSON is wicked fast. And then like once you have that, the return value of that is like, oh, this JSON API style, and the model layer just works on top. So, yes.
So does that mean serializers are going away? Because it sounds like what you're saying is that the new adapters do the job that serializers used to do, which is converting things into a canonical format.
Yeah, maybe. I don't know. I don't use Ember data, so it's hard for me to say. So I installed this plugin, but it doesn't appear to be working. Does anyone know how Chrome works? On Unix? I mean, it should be the same, right? Well, anyway, let's...
Is it Chromium?
Is this Chromium? No, it's Chrome. I installed it.
Go to extensions, see if it's active. Yeah. Maybe it needs permission.
This is too much work. Y'all can play with it yourself. Let's get back to the presentation. So anyway, this was super cool. One of my favorites. I think the theme of the conference was like every talk was really kind of stellar, which is pretty rare. Anyone want to talk about this one? Tools of the trade. I don't have a. Oh, sorry. This was just a presentation. Yeah, I don't remember. Do you remember what this talk was about, Sean? It was about UXy stuff, but.
Yeah, it was about creating a design pattern library.
Oh yes. I don't have much to say about this one. Do you?
No, it's just interesting. There's an email list you can sign up for.
Yeah.
Once this is released or close to it, they'll email you.
Yeah.
And the actual product that they're creating, not product, but for everyone, is a reusable set of components of sorts that have a design language and a way to compose them. It wasn't like quite clear exactly what it would be, but the impression was that it's something like a Google Material Design or something like that, so that you could take that as a guide for creating your UIs, but still theme them and design it however you want. But
yeah, it seems like a cool idea. This was a fun talk. Luke Malia runs the NYC Ember meetup. If you're ever in New York when one of those is going on, I highly recommend attending because they're huge. I think he caps attendance at like 100 or 150, and there's a wait list always. They're just really well run. I always feel ashamed when I see like the videos and things from it. I'm like, oh yeah, we're just a little 2-cow Midwest town. Nothing like the big city Ember meetups. But he was talking about kind of the ecosystem of Ember add-ons and how multiple people are trying to solve the problem of like, how do you take an Ember CLI app and then put it someplace to deploy it? And there are like 5 or 6 solutions around this. And he was basically announcing that the top 4 sort of by usage got together and were like, it's cool that we all experimented, let 1,000 flowers bloom, but like it's time to be grown-ups and just convert these into one project. And so they're converting that into one project, which is like going to be hopefully a fairly patterned and canonical way to do deploys of applications. I was pretty excited about that and to see where that goes. Plus, I always like when similar projects merge into one project, just because JavaScript people seem to hate doing that. I don't know why. Oh, this was, if anyone doesn't know, Lauren Tan, Sugar Pirate _ is her Twitter handle. She does these really amazing articles that are very UI focused. So it'll be like, oh, you've seen this effect in some application, like how would you do it in Ember? And the crazy thing is her solution she comes up with is always like 15 lines of code, and it's like, boom, and now you have modals just like this app, or like now you have a sort of a lift just like this app, and it's just 10 lines of code. So she showed that. Ember CLI Flash is one of the add-ons that she worked with, but her talk was basically going through a bunch of UX patterns and talking about like, how would we do these in Ember? And it turned out to be like super tiny. So here's drag and drop, for example. This is the entire drag and drop implementation if you're using Ember, which is pretty cool. There's that like loading bar at the top. So that was a fun one. So she's really funny. She was just sort of a visual designer and just kind of started getting into JavaScript. And is like has total imposter syndrome. She thinks like any second now we're going to wake up and realize she doesn't know what she's talking about. So she's very kind and very humble. And I get to talk with her briefly at the speaker dinner. And she was in awe of everyone. And I'm like, I'm in awe of you. You take these things and turn them into such small articles. Cool. Anyone else want to talk? Which one? This one? What was it fun? Which
this was
thing?
another idea that she talked about, where there's a subreddit called Shower Thoughts, where people just post random things that they thought about in the shower. Presumably, it doesn't have to be, but like interesting ideas, like usually correlating two concepts together. But like one of them's on the screen, but there's all kinds of things like that. So she wanted to take this inspired by Slack, like Slack does this type of thing, not with Shower Thoughts, but when it's loading, it'll say something funny to like make you not care that it's taking a moment to load. So she wrote this add-on that loading screens in Ember would pull directly from the subreddit for Shower Thoughts. You just show random things from there while it's loading, and then she just made an app that randomly had. So I just thought this was really fun, and it just plays into basically her whole aesthetic.
Yeah.
Which is just to be playful about these things.
Yes. Oh wait, look at this. They have 6 to 5 now.
Oh.
Although that's 6 to 5's been removed. It's now called Babel. So this might be cool. The real cool thing is, the templates are templates. There's nothing super exciting about templates, and CSS is CSS. But the amount of JavaScript code to get this sort of complicated loading behavior is pretty tiny.
But it's just hooking into Ember's loading states already.
Yeah.
So this was one of my favorite things, just because it made me laugh.
Good times. She's an incredibly clever and very good developer. So this talk was fun. And also goofy for a couple of reasons. Chris is 19. Yeah, something like 19. I think he's 19 years old. And was just like a local college student, and he pitched this whole talk about how there's sort of academic literature around visual displays of information, and there's like a grammar of that, and how that maps very nicely onto the notion of components and building up richer behavior with components. Trying to think of what was this his examples of them. Oh, this was the example app.
Composing components like axes as a separate.
Yes, exactly. So in this case, like each of these arrows would be a thing, or the map itself would be a thing. It was pretty cool. Do you have any comments about that? I think this is a talk you just have to watch. Like it's very visual.
Yeah. All these are recorded.
Yes, all of them are recorded. But I like this talk. I was just mostly impressed that like he was 19 and appeared to be more confident speaking on stage than I ever have been, and then also sort of more technically competent than I am at 34. So basically, I'm screwed. I should just go be like a yak farmer somewhere because one day this generation of people is going to just have my job. Yeah. This was part of the lightning talks, wasn't it?
Yes.
So the next session was lightning talks, where people just sort of pitched ideas and there was voting, and we decided to do them. Ember Observer, which is actually now getting moved into the Ember add-on site.
Oh, really?
Yes, another example of we don't like tools that do the same thing. Katie and her husband, they basically so if any you've all seen the Ember add-on site for getting sort of new Ember plugins and stuff, add-ons, if you will. One thing that she felt was missing from that is often missing from things like Node or the Ruby ecosystem is like, okay, cool, there's like 1,000 of these plugins, 12 of them do deploys. Which ones can I trust if I don't already know? And so she created an Ember application and did a lightning talk about this thing she made, and where she went and scored them, and basically like people could review. It had test coverage, it had recent commits and downloads, GitHub points, and would then create some sort of metric around like which of these are the best ones. And this is being actually just added to the Ember add-on site. So now these will be ranked, sort of like how Ruby Toolbox is ranked.
One of my favorite points is you get a point for having more than one contributor.
Yeah. Yep. It's pretty cool. Was that a whole talk that she did, or was it a lightning talk? Because the orbit thing was a full talk, right? Oh, interesting. Yeah, these aren't grouped the same. Dan Gephardt, who, by the way, is like one of the nicest people I've ever met in my life. He's just very quiet and calm and thankful. He was talking about a library called Orbit, which is a little bit like if you imagine Ember Data was just a generic thing. The gist of this talk is basically thinking about your client application as just another node in a large distributed system. And you do data syncing, and at some point you want eventual consistency between all your nodes. And so this is just a library that has that as like its core strategy. And it can hook into Ember Data. I don't know what the future of like Ember Orbit, Ember Data would be. Like it seems like it'd be useful to merge, but I don't really work on the Ember Data project, so I don't know. I know Stanley Stewart has been like, well, we at the very least are going to steal a lot of their ideas. We may merge at some point. This was fun. You get to see a picture of Dan at like 20 steering a like battleship. Yeah, it's pretty funny. Good presentation. Ember Data. Is this part of that talk? Sorry. Sean prepared these slides.
I don't remember.
Yeah.
It's just announcements about it.
Yeah, I think Dan maybe talked about these. Yeah. No, this is part of Dan's talk. I'm not going to. So Dan also helps the JSON API. So he was talking about Ember Data. Relationships are going to always be asynchronous. Pro tip, if you go to any other framework and they have relationships that are sometimes synchronous and sometimes asynchronous, that is a gigantic refactoring hazard. You basically want to assume everything is asynchronous all the time. It may be asynchronous and immediately resolves, but always program for asynchronous. Is that the question you were going to ask?
That was flashing through my head.
Yes. Yeah. It is totally fine if it resolves instantaneously, but start with the assumption that it's always asynchronous, and you will just have a much easier time.
Yeah, so the whole like being able to sideload things like in the same payload.
Yep.
Would just be like, oh, hold on, let me create a promise for that.
Yep.
Oh, it's here.
Yes. Yeah. You can create an immediate resolving promise for sure. And then JSON API is the spec, and that will be like the official. Ember Data will be like the out-of-the-box first official supporter of JSON API, which will be nice. Pagination and filtering are also part of the API and will be part of Ember Data. And then these things ship at 1.0. JSON API 1.0 spec. This was
Which is huge.
yes.
JSON API by itself.
Yes. JSON API by itself is gigantic. JSON API is one of those things where it's like you can even like take the safe position of like, I hate it. I think it's stupid. All its decisions are just really, really dumb. It doesn't even matter because it's a thing that we all agree to hate together and then move on. And I actually don't think it's dumb. I actually think many of the decisions are very good. The 1.0, they've been slowly mutating towards a like final spec on how to communicate with JSON over HTTP. And the 1.0 is basically taking a lot of shoulds and turning them into musts. Which is nice. So the API has gotten very, very specific. And I think there's out-of-the-box Ruby support already. There's a library, Active Model Serializer is a JSON API mode where it will just emit this automatically. And I think Stanley Stewart's working on a Node one.
Ember Data will do it.
Yeah. Ember Data will do it as well. And then
Forever backwards compatible.
forever.
So,
Oh, cool.
won't say it's 1.0.
Forever backwards compatible. I forget what Matt's talk was. I don't remember what his talk was. Fast forward. He was just talking about, he did the community survey. So Matt's was kind of I don't remember what his talk was. There's some ES6 stuff and some he was basically, yeah, there's a collection of ideas. I think his first part of his talk was basically when Ember started almost 4 years ago, there was a lot of things missing from the ecosystem, and many of these things are now part of the ecosystem. They're going to be part of future ECMAScript specifications like ES6, aka ES 2015, ES 2016, etc. And there are ways to use these features today and transpile them to other languages, and that means we get to use them out of the box, which is pretty awesome. Probably the one that's kind of like the coolest is decorators, although the plus syntax is no longer the case. I think it's an @ sign, but that's generally... Yes, it's still being decided, but that's basically how it works. So, for example, I don't know if we have a slide on this, but computed properties will not be a thing you chain at the end of a function anymore. You'll just have a getter, and above that you'll just use the computed property decorator and say what it depends on, and just have a regular getter. So we won't have to extend function prototype with additional functionality. It would look like, in this case, the negative depends on. Hey, look, there's the example. It's actually @ sign now, but sort of negative depends on title author, and then get byline returns with some string interpolation. That's how you do computed properties in the future, and it's just part of the specification. So we wouldn't need to create our own object system anymore. Questions about that? That's a little weird if you're not familiar with decorators. Yes.
Is it just like a Python decorator? Or like a function that takes...
Yeah, it's similar. You're going to have a bad time if you try to map them one-to-one, but a similar concept, yeah. The implementations are radically different, but the use cases are very similar, yeah. At least that's my understanding. I have not done extensive Python. I do have played with decorators, but it's useful in the way that Python is for things like validations or computed properties. There's actually totally unrelated to this presentation. Oh, that's awkward. Sorry, Sean. How do I go away to another thing? Nope.
Now your focus
Nope.
is on the VM instead of...
There we go. Give me another Chrome window. ES6 decorators Lodash. This just came out like today or something. Someone released a library. It's not actual Lodash, but basically turning. I don't know where this is. Turning Lodash functions into decorators. Let's see what it looks like. See if there's an example. This is not actually the solution, but yeah. Does anyone know how to Google? Pardon? Yeah, no. All right. See ya. Oh wait. This is how I always find things. I'm like, that's right. It was a tweet. I'm gonna go back to Twitter. Look at funny pictures. What? Find, yes.
Function is now control.
Function is now control. There we go.
Very custom setup.
Of course, because why would you have a standard setup anyway? Thanks, Sean. So this is Lodash as a set of decorators. So for example, you'd have a function. These are stupid names. This should be called something else. This should be called notify, but it's being decorated with curry and auto binding, which means that this is properly set to this object, and it will automatically curry. So I think this is pretty nifty. Or here's one. So it would not be called debounce. They do the classic explainer's flaw of naming things stupidly, so you think the name is important. It is not. This could be called foo. So debounce 1000 foo just means if you called this function multiple times, it would always return the cached value until 1,000 milliseconds had gone by. Which is how Lodash works, but it's cool that you can just have that as a function decoration. So that's cool. And then he talked a little bit about the community survey. There was a big community survey where he asked questions about what do people do? And that's the results are all over there, which is pretty cool. And I think you can go to the results down there, 21-created.com/Ember Community Survey 2015. Ember Flow. Oh, this was a cool presentation. This is another one that's very visual. You have to go watch the video. But he was using all Ember application structure with Polymer components, including the Polymer animation stuff, and talked about like how that worked. And it was actually not terribly hard to do. And you got some really nice performance. Although weirdly, probably the weird takeaway from this is it performs better in Fire. The Google Polymer project performs better in Firefox than in Chrome.
Yeah.
Yeah, I actually wasn't here for this talk. I had to step out, so I don't remember what it was about. Do you?
I was just writing a chat app, but using services in some way.
Yeah.
My note said nothing of note.
Wow.
This is
Wow,
website.
harsh.
I think he was using websites.
Yeah,
then
and
it was
service.
like a Ember/website.
Well, and that's all we have to say about that. Ember Islands is a cool project. I suggest you just take it out. It's basically being able to use Ember components on a statically rendered page. So, like, to replace something like jQuery, you can just have specific parts of the page move over to Ember components. Like, no routing, obviously, but you can get the component stuff. It was a cool project.
Migrating to.
Yes, yeah. If you're trying to migrate like a larger Rails or just server rendered application to being more dynamic, just pick parts of it and move Ember in until basically the whole page is now Ember, and then do another page, and now you have a reason to toss the router in. So, oh, this was a really good talk. Brittany works for Mozilla. So the Mozilla has a new operating system where the apps are all HTML, CSS, and JavaScript based. So if you imagine, like, if only Android, you didn't have to use Java. You just wrote in these technologies that we already know. And that's basically, Yes, like WebOS. That's what Firefox OS is. And they were looking for a large application structure that already existed. And so they were playing with Ember as like the sort of way that their developers were talking about the larger ecosystem. So they didn't have to think about, like, how do we structure applications? Like, we have applications, they're structured. Now we can worry about, like, you know, button presses and the geolocator and stuff. And they wanted a command line tool for turning Ember applications into Firefox OS applications. And they were sort of writing this by hand in Node. And Brittany was like, and we kept, going to see what Ember CLI was doing. And then we realized, like, if we're stealing this much, we should probably just be using Ember CLI. And now Ember CLI FXOS is just an Ember add-on that will augment Ember CLI to emit a Firefox OS application. They also have basically announced that, like, Ember is like the preferred strategy for building Firefox OS apps. So they're huge fans of it. Yehuda works very closely with Mozilla, mostly on Rust. So that's pretty cool. It's nice to have another player in that market. I wasn't here for this talk either.
This was just different techniques for measuring performance.
Yeah. Yeah. I'd watch it. This one was neat because he didn't really talk about what he was doing. He was just building an Ember app and typing essentially C++ code. Well, yeah, and he was, and everyone was like, what is going on? And then the big reveal was he's using Emscripten so that he can actually take C++ code, transpile it, turn it into JavaScript, and run it in the browser. It was a neat trick. Cool trick. Don't do that. But it was a neat trick, how you can use it. This was a talk that Eric gave. It was basically like a way that, since we know sort of about the build environment, we can write CSS selectors to be scoped only to a component so they don't leak outward, which is huge. There's no way yet, unfortunately, we don't have like real shadow DOMs. We can't prevent leaks inward, but we can prevent styles from like messing with stuff that's not about the component. It was a fun talk. He was working, we shared a hotel room, and he was working on this till like 2 a.m. the night before, and I was like, I'm trying to sleep, bro. It's like, I'm going to finish in a second. And then Edward gave a talk about Liquid Fire, which is all about animations. It was surprising that animations were very similar to the Polymer talk. Yeah. It was weird. So I think the cool thing from this about Liquid Fire, actually, I guess we can go look at the, is the demo runnable, or is it just like you need to install an Ember app? Boo. He doesn't have it running anywhere. It's so easy to do that now, though. The thing that I think most people don't realize about Liquid Fire is it's not actually an animation library. It's the hooks for an animation library. It happens to ship with some animations out of the box, but it's actually, you can hook in whatever animation stuff you want. It's basically just like the places where the animation code would go. It happens to rely on a library called Velocity.js, the author of which wrote a really, really good book about animating on the web that just came out I highly recommend it. It's like one of the best books on animation I've ever read, period, let alone animation for the web. Plus, I'm friends with the guy, so small plug for his book, because I was super impressed. And Sean will tell you, I don't pull punches. If I think something's stupid, I will make that very known.
Yes, you talk every day.
Every day, Sean. Someday you'll be cool. Ember paper, I stepped out for this one, but I'm assuming this was a lightning talk about the material design library. Material design. I like material design. The question I have about material design apps, or material design libraries, is material design, for those who don't know, is like Google's specification about like how to build interactions and specific visual elements and how to style them. It's very detailed. There's like descriptions of how to do everything, and every one of these gets like the type size is wrong. There's literally a chart that says here are the type sizes, and you go to all of these and like you just look at them and you're like the types are all the wrong size. Like you have detailed instructions about what to do, but it'd be cool if you can use that out of the box. Closing keynote, that's crazy. We're already there. Which was not given by him. It was given by Chris Epstein, who is the Compass guy. He makes Compass. And the closing keynote was basically like, I don't know. You have any thoughts on the closing keynote?
Don't be a jerk.
Yeah, don't be a jerk.
It was a lot more about the community.
Yeah. Yeah.
And how you shouldn't be a jerk.
Yes.
Sorry, I had to watch that one.
Yes, I agree. All the videos are recorded. We thought it was incredibly well run. We had 625 attendees. A very small no-show rate, which is interesting. Leia runs a bunch of conferences, and 10 to 15% is more typical no-show rate. So very, very high attendance. There's Tom and Yehuda with a bunch of us, with a selfie stick. There's a bunch of the Groupon people. There was a Tomster was there. You can get your picture taken with him. There were also funny hats. And so Groupon, I think we sent like almost 15 people. Yeah, it was a good amount of people showed up, and so we had some funds. And that's it. You know what talk is missing? Jamie's community talk, which I thought was really, really good. How did we miss that? And by we, I mean I didn't contribute to creating these slides at all because I'm lazy. Sean did all this work, and I just stood up here and talked. YouTube. Oh wait, there's a link to it, isn't there? All recorded videos. So all the videos up here on a nice YouTube playlist. Trying to think of where. Oh my God!
Oh yeah.
This talk, I'm just gonna play it for you. This is Torrin Phillips. I've seen him do presentations. Oh, when he pitched this, we had a lot of like. So I helped because I'm an Ember core. I helped do a bunch of the. We did a round of submissions of talks that were blind, so we didn't know who was doing them. And the goal there was to get a good representation of new and old speakers, old being people who've spoken previously, not necessarily older in years, men, women, people of all over. And we feel like doing blind submissions is a good way to get started that. And this talk came through, and we had a lot of talks about live coding, and pretty much it was like, no, live coding talks are not good. And then this one, I was like, I think this is Torrin, and we should probably say yes because I've seen him do live coding before. One, if you think you're good at Vim, you are not good at Vim. Two, if you think Ember can't be test-driven, like you're just totally wrong as well. This is really two talks in one.
All right, so if you're here doing test-driven development by example, when I put this talk together, I was sort of thinking I couldn't do a talk if it wasn't a big announcement like HTML bars or something that would blow away Tom and
I'm trying to
Yehuda.
figure out what's a good place to show. I don't want to make you guys watch a whole talk.
Feel like I know where the client or the user, the end user, is coming from. And in this particular example, we just have unassigned and assigned items.
Yeah, there's a part where he's like live changing dozens of lines of code all at once with like no keystrokes and incrementing numbers. Yeah, it's
different text.
I highly recommend going and watching this video. You will feel incredibly outclassed in terms of development because he basically like live programmed with no mistakes incredibly quickly, test driving an entire application, and at the end he was just like closed his laptop and walked off the stage. Yeah, it was amazing. Smart guy. All right, that's the end of me talking. Yep. Any questions?
What's the name of the animation book?
I will get that
Web
for you.
animation in JavaScript.
Is it? Have you seen this book?
Physical design.
Yeah.
Hang on. Why is?
Maybe I found a different one.
I think it's about the Edward it's physical design. I think it's how to make it.
Book.
There's a link in there. I don't
Why doesn't he link it on his page?
So I think I went to Amazon and then searched.
Yeah. Web animation using JavaScript. We have like a beta early access through Safari Books, and I've been sort of reading it while he's watching it, or reading it while he's writing it, and it's been just a really, really good book. It's weird. The last chapter is basically like a tutorial of doing all this animation stuff, and usually those are things where it's just like, nah, I'll skip this part. Like I got all the stuff, and he was like, no, you really need to go through the tutorial, and it was actually super useful. I feel like I have a much better understanding of animation at this point, and he does the library Velocity.js, which is a drop-in replacement for like jQuery animation. Wait, what's the new command? Orange is the new black. What's the command? Function is the new command. Function is control. Just want to make the screen bigger, man. I just want to do a thing. So it's a drop-in replacement for like $animate, but performance characteristics are really impressive, and the number of places using it are pretty ridiculous. So
is that using JavaScript to make CSS changes?
It is animating with JavaScript, not CSS. His book goes into why you want to do that. Yeah. I mean, yeah, it's mutating a CSS, a style property, but it's not using CSS animations.
Right. I thought the benefit. Okay, well, I guess I have to read the book
Yes.
to find out, right?
Read the book. It's all in the book. Yeah. Other questions? Comments? From other people that went? Not me.
If you didn't go, and if you're thinking about going, go next year.
Yeah.
It's a really well done conference.
Yeah. It was just like everything was just put together super well. It's kind of crazy. There was never a point where I was like, oh, you know what I wish we had? And then that wasn't like right out in the hallway exactly at the time where I was like, man, I could really use there's a snack right there. This is amazing. So.
And I think like unlike RailsConf, it's always going to happen in Portland, right? Or just
Yes, yeah. So the plan is probably always in Portland. Leia and Yehuda and Tom are in Portland. It's just much easier for them to plan. Portland is also a really cool city. I quite like it. It's a little small, but fun place. And yeah, well, this will always be the official Ember conference. There are multiple regional conferences. There's Wicked Good Ember in Boston. That's happening in July. There is Cincy Day of Ember, I think also happening in July in Cincinnati. And there's one other regional. There's EmberConf EU. I don't know if that's happening again. And then like one other regional conference. So fun stuff. All right. Any questions, comments? Very well. We were to our traditional going down to the motel bar, which is the bar on the first floor of this building. So if you go out the elevators outside to the right and then back inside, you'll be at a bar. Feel free to reconvene there if you would like to have a tasty alcoholic or non-alcoholic beverage. Get some snacks. Thank you. And thank you all for coming.